You won't believe what just happened at the U.S. Congress this morning. During a live broadcast of a hearing, Donald Trump suddenly interrupted Caroline Leavitt in an atmosphere as tense as a taut wire. But what no one expected was Caroline's response. No anger, no argument, just a single icy reply that instantly turned the tables, leaving the entire room holding its breath. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The atmosphere in the House Oversight Committee hearing was heavy, tense like the calm before a major. The storm was brewing. Congress members kept shifting seats. Aides whispered behind stacks of open documents, their eyes scanning nameplates. With scrutiny and caution, everyone could sense a wave was about to crash, though no one knew exactly when. C-SPAN broadcasted live, drawing millions of viewers nationwide, from people sipping morning coffee to reporters on edge, to Americans trying to make sense of the deepening turmoil their country faced. Representative Caroline Leavitt, a Republican, was speaking with confidence and sharpness, dissecting loopholes in campaign finance policy. Suddenly, from 2 seats away, Democratic Representative Donald Trump cut in. "Sit down, girl. Don't embarrass yourself further." The words landed like a punch, reverberating through the room. It wasn't just what was said, but how Dolan's eyes, narrowed and lips pressed tight. A clear display of contempt, as if Caroline didn't belong at that podium. The term girl carried historical weight, touching wounds that have never fully healed. Despite both politicians being dressed in crisp suits and seated behind microphones, the room didn't erupt. It froze. For 3 or 4 seconds, everything paused. A male congressman in the back looked up from his papers. An aide blinked. Confusion. The stenographer hesitated over the keyboard. Viewers in front of their screens fell silent, some rewinding the broadcast, others whispering in disbelief. What did he just say? Caroline didn't flinch. Not a furrowed brow, not a wavering glance. Just steady, even breaths. Her left hand gently set down a sheet of paper, her icy gaze locked on Donald Trump, unwavering for a split second. The camera captured the moment perfectly. One trying to belittle his opponent, the other standing resolute, unshaken. Before she spoke, the silence seemed to ask, "Did everyone hear that?" Then Caroline spoke. Just 1 sentence, but enough to flip the entire room's dynamic. "I was elected to represent my district, my values, and every woman who's been told to shrink herself to please others." Her voice wasn't shrill or harsh, but her words carried a power the microphone could barely capture. A faint sigh came from someone nearby, as if they had just witnessed a deft dodge and a clean counterstrike, without a single swing. Dolan blinked, as if wondering if he'd gone too far. He leaned back, pretending to brush an invisible speck of dust off his jacket, trying to maintain composure. But the room's energy had shifted. Scattered applause broke out. Not thunderous, but a slow, meaningful clap spreading from one seat to another. An older Democratic congressman from Idaho tapped his fingers lightly on the table, his face expressionless. Outside the room, social media exploded. Phones buzzed nonstop. Screenshots spread like wildfire. A short clip was posted with the caption, "Donald Trump told Representative Caroline Leavitt to sit down, girl," and instantly paid the price. News channels scrambled, abandoning old scripts as anchors pushed fresh reports across desks. And Caroline? She didn't smile or gloat, just quietly returned to her notes and said, "Now I'd like to continue." After that moment, the hearing almost lost its focus. No one was talking about campaign finance issues anymore. Instead, every conversation revolved around tone, respect, and the meaning of one powerful figure trying to diminish another with just 3 words. But this wasn't the end of the matter. It was only the beginning of something bigger. The cameras kept rolling. Most people thought it was just a fleeting explosive moment, a viral clip, a hot headline for the next 24 hours. But what Caroline Leavitt did next showed she wasn't about to let it stop there. She was turning it into something more profound. In the hearing room, things tried to return to normal. The chair lightly tapped the gavel, calling for order and redirecting the discussion. But the attention had shifted entirely to Caroline. Her voice, her demeanor, and the way she didn't let that insult shake her resolve. There was something different, something powerful, radiating even through the screens. Dolan Trump sat back, lips pressed tight. He tried to appear unaffected, even bored, but his hands under the table kept moving. Caroline didn't mention him again, nor did she need to. Every word she spoke afterward carried an unspoken message. You can't make me small. In the audience section, a college intern named Sophia Martinez, seated behind the press row, scribbled furiously in her notebook. She texted her roommate. "Did you hear what Caroline just said? Gave me chills." Sophia wasn't alone. Dozens of online viewers began quoting Caroline's response in comments, captions, and social media posts. By late afternoon, the C-SPAN clip of the hearing had racked up over 800,000 views in just a few hours. But it wasn't the budget, charts, or policy debates that drew viewers. It was the 35-second video capturing Caroline's poised, powerful, and precise reaction. News channels played the clip on loop. On MSNBC, a panel dissected the discriminatory undertones of the exchange. One commentator was blunt. "Don't pretend that remark was harmless. It was a power play." And Caroline dismantled it with dignity. Even CNN's usually neutral coverage chimed in, calling her response a masterclass in handling pressure without losing composure. But it wasn't just political pundits who felt it. It was ordinary people, those with jobs, kids, bills, and exhaustion, who saw something familiar in Caroline's gaze. A teacher in Boise posted, "I've been the sit-down girl. In meetings, classes, workshops." Her response hit me hard. "That's how you answer back." A grandmother in Oklahoma shared on Facebook, "My mother couldn't speak up like that. I'm proud Caroline Leavitt did." This wasn't the kind of drama that flares up and fades. It was a quiet but persistent resonance etched into people's hearts. By day's end, Caroline's press secretary, Ethan Brooks, sat at his desk, scrolling through a flood of interview requests, local radio, morning shows, podcasts hosted by Black creators, all wanting to hear from her. Caroline didn't rush to speak. She let the moment settle, giving the public time to process what had happened. In the office, her team gathered privately, window blinds half drawn, footsteps echoing from the hallway. Staff stood there, still, stunned by what they'd witnessed. Ethan broke the silence. "You okay?" Caroline, still standing, looked at him and said, "I'm fine. But don't think I didn't catch every detail of that performance. It wasn't just aimed at me. It was a show for anyone standing behind him." Another aide, Riley, nodded slowly. Calls were coming in from Essence, the Breakfast Club, even Jon Stewart's team. Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Jon Stewart's? Still doing a show?" "No," Riley laughed. "But they're doing political segments with guests." Caroline turned to the window, gazing at the street. "Let them wait. I'll speak, but when I do, I want to talk to the people who needed to hear today. Not for applause, not for a soundbite, but for the girls like me, and others who've been silenced by that tone." Meanwhile, Dolan Trump issued a brief statement through his communications director, calling the public's reaction overblown and urging people to move forward, focus on policy. The statement fell flat, ignored by most. That evening, at a community event in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Caroline Leavitt kept her promise to attend a scholarship ceremony for high school seniors. After the event, a young girl approached her. "Grandma called me crying today," she said. "She said she never thought she'd see someone respond like that. Not yelling, not backing down, just calm, full of confidence." Caroline placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, smiling. "You don't always have to be calm," she said. "What matters is knowing when not to let someone steal your strength." Those words spread quickly. People started calling it the Leavitt Declaration, but the reverberations didn't fade. They only grew louder, and the wave of attention was just beginning to swell. As the sun set in San Diego, The clip had exploded across the internet. Millions had watched, and unlike most political headlines, this moment needed little explanation. You heard it, you saw it, you felt it, and the internet did too. On TikTok, edited versions of the clip were set to every sound imaginable: rap, gospel choirs, bursting fireworks. One TikTok creator slowed down Caroline's response, adding the caption, "This is how a woman who knows her power moves." That version alone garnered over 2 million views. By midnight, a cartoonist in Nevada had already sketched the scene: Caroline at the mic, poised and regal, while Donald Trump was tangled in his own microphone cord. The caption read, "When you try to silence someone but only make their voice louder." Hashtags began trending. 2 phrases. One moment, 1,000 meanings. One side celebrated quiet strength. The other side relived every moment where someone tried to shrink another in a split second. And people were talking. Long thread posts emerged across X and Reddit, users sharing their own stories. Moments in meetings, family dinners, PTA gatherings, job interviews. Moments they were interrupted, mocked, called girl by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. One woman wrote, "I'm 45 with 2 degrees, my own company, and a mortgage. Yet last week a man I'd never met called me girl while I was explaining data he didn't understand." Caroline's face in that hearing? That's me. That's all of us. Soon, celebrities chimed in. Kerry Washington quoted Caroline's words, "I was elected to stand up." The post got over 100,000 likes. Shonda Rhimes shared the clip with just one word: dignity. But what pushed the moment beyond a viral blip was the response from ordinary people. Moms, students, veterans, office workers, factory employees, pastors. They didn't share it for drama. They shared it because it finally voiced something they had never been able to put into words. Even media outlets that usually skipped congressional hearings couldn't ignore it. BuzzFeed ran a headline: "Caroline Leavitt just gave a masterclass in holding power without losing cool." The Cut called it the most powerful 2 seconds in politics this year. Back in Washington, D.C., Caroline's team was caught off guard by the speed of the storm. The digital communications team at Caroline's office had to triple their capacity to handle the flood of incoming messages. Some were from the press, but most weren't. People were writing just to say thank you. Woman from Columbus said she hadn't watched the news in 2 years, but her daughter showed her the clip, and she cried. A retired Navy officer wrote, "Ma'am, I don't agree with your politics, but I respect what you did. You didn't make a scene. You just stood firm. That matters." Of course, not all feedback was positive. This was the internet. Critics tried to spin the story. Pundits tried to downplay its impact, calling it overhyped or staged political theater. But that only added fuel to the fire, because people knew what they saw, and it didn't need explaining. It needed recognition. Meanwhile, Donald Trump posted a photo the next morning, smiling on the Capitol steps with a caption about fighting for freedom. But the comments below were unrelenting. Not mindless attacks, but pointed, sharp questions. "Still think calling a grown woman girl was a good idea? Was that supposed to be friendly? Or did you just think no one would call you out?" Donald Trump stayed silent, because the damage wasn't in what he said, it was in what it revealed. Meanwhile, Caroline Leavitt still hadn't done a single interview, held a press conference, or launched a flashy media campaign. She let social media tell the story. That evening, she flew to Atlanta, attending a community meeting she had promised to join months earlier. It was small. About 40 folding chairs, mostly older women and local organizers. When she walked in, the room stood and clapped. One woman rose, voice trembling. "We saw what you did. And ma'am, you did it for all of us." Caroline smiled softly and replied, "I did it because I had to." Something had quietly begun, deeper than likes, louder than shares. Beyond the spotlight, beyond the viral quotes and TikTok edits, Caroline Leavitt was just a girl from Memphis, Tennessee. A girl with a radiant smile, an innate resilience, and a voice that refused to be silenced. Her mother, Evelyn, was a nurse, not the half-hearted kind. She worked double shifts most weekends at Methodist Hospital, raised 3 kids, and still found time to protest when she saw injustice. Her father, Marcus, was quieter, a union worker with a dry sense of humor and calloused hands. He rarely talked politics, but always knew who was doing honest work and who deserved better pay. Caroline didn't grow up rich. She didn't grow up connected, but she grew up with clarity. Clarity about values, about dignity, about why you speak up when someone's being trampled, even if it's not you. In high school, she was the girl who asked too many questions, not to be annoying, but because someone had to ask. Why's the dress code stricter for girls? The kind of questions that made teachers either love her or fear her, sometimes both. At Spelman College, she majored in political science and waited tables on weekends. Once she lost points for debating a professor over voter suppression data. She didn't care. She kept the documents and pinned them to the student union bulletin board. She started showing up at city council meetings, not for the cameras, not for the clout, but to hold people accountable. And then, one day, someone said what others had only thought. "You should run." She laughed at first, but the idea stuck. When she ran for the Georgia House, she won with just over 50% of the vote. A tight race, a brutal campaign. A few donors pulled out midway, saying she was too blunt, too urban, too unapologetic. She sent those donors thank you cards after winning. That hearing, the moment with Donald Trump, wasn't the first time Caroline had been disrespected, but it was the first time the entire nation saw how she responded. In Atlanta, after the community meeting, a local event organizer, Miss Clara, took her hand and said, "You made us proud." Caroline nodded, her gaze steady. "I did it for people like you, people who taught me how to stand tall." Meanwhile, Donald Trump kept trying to salvage his image. He appeared at an event in Virginia, emphasizing policy priorities. But the public's eyes stayed on Caroline. Even some of Dolan's congressional colleagues began keeping their distance, not wanting to be tied to the controversy. Especially among female lawmakers, quiet messages began pouring in. They texted Caroline privately, not to be performative, but because they genuinely felt what she had done. Online, the wave of support kept growing. In Chicago, a group of young women launched a campaign called Stand Like Caroline, urging others to share moments they'd overcome condescension, dismissal, and the infamous girl treatment. A high school in Miami invited her to speak, hoping she'd inspire young minds still figuring out their voice. Caroline hadn't said yes yet, but her team was tracking every invitation because they knew this wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. But Caroline didn't let the spotlight derail her mission. She kept her work rhythm steady. She understood something that most politicians forget. The power of a moment isn't in hashtags or headlines, but in the change it can spark. She began drafting a proposal, one focused on gender equity education in schools. It was inspired directly by the hundreds of messages she received. "If we teach kids respect early," she told Ethan, "maybe fewer adults will grow up thinking they can call someone girl without consequences." When Donald Trump told her to sit down, it wasn't just an insult. It was every moment she'd been told, "You're too loud, you're too angry, you're too blunt, you're too hard to control." It was a reminder that some people still confuse confidence for arrogance, especially in a black woman's voice. But Caroline wasn't rattled. She'd been in those rooms her whole life. She knew who she was. And now those who had underestimated her were beginning to realize their mistake, and Congress, it was about to feel that shift. The next morning, Capitol Hill buzzed, but it wasn't about bills or policies. TV producers scrambled behind studio sets. Morning shows skipped their usual economic reports. Everyone wanted to know, would Caroline Leavitt speak publicly? Would Donald Trump double down, explain, or walk it back? MSNBC aired a news segment, "The Power of Poise." Fox News dismissed it. Overblown congressional outrage. CNN called in analysts, and even they agreed. This doesn't look good for Dolan. But Caroline? She stayed silent. No press conference, no Instagram Live, no clickbait tweets. Just a simple, quiet statement, more like a handwritten letter than a press release. My words yesterday weren't rehearsed. They reflect experiences many women, especially women of color, have lived their whole lives. I will always speak up for my district and for dignity. No attacks, no politics, just clarity. And that clarity rang louder than any noise. By noon, even the White House press secretary commented. She called it an unfortunate exchange and praised Caroline's professionalism. Meanwhile, Dolan Trump's office was in freefall. A leaked memo showed advisors begging him to call the remark a joke or offer a gentle apology. But Dolan refused. Pride won out. One of his close allies, Representative Tyler Grayson, tried to shift the narrative. In a radio interview, Dolan Trump tried calling the incident a distraction. But the host didn't buy it. The public didn't either. Dolan posted about energy prices, shared posed photos with veterans captioning vaguely, "We stay resilient." But the comment section had a different mood. It's not about resilience, it's about listening. And worse, silence from his own longtime supporters. The clip, when rewatched, only looked worse. There was no way to spin it. The moment had spoken for itself. Caroline, meanwhile, didn't have to say a word. She didn't need defending either. Her presence was her response, even usually reserved. Colleagues began to reach out. One voicemail from Representative Calvin Porter simply said, "You handled that with grace. We saw it's not just about you, it's about all of us." Back in her office, her aide Riley sorted through dozens of interview requests. "NPR wants you in studio," she said. Caroline just shook her head. Not yet. She let the story keep spreading, not through sound bites, but through impact. As Caroline's name climbed trending lists, the invitations exploded. The View, CBS Sunday Morning, PBS NewsHour, Morehouse College each wanted a piece of the story, a soundbite about gender, race, or political civility. But Caroline stood her ground. In time, a cluttered meeting room, she looked around at her team. Everyone wants a headline, but if we speak, it'll be on our terms. Meanwhile, Dolan Trump struggled to control the narrative. He showed up at public events, but the attention stayed on Caroline. Some of his own colleagues began distancing themselves, unwilling to be tied to the fallout. But Caroline, she didn't pause to gloat. She just kept doing the work. In Birmingham, Alabama, at a small workshop, an older woman told her, "I was called girl when I was 50. Watching you, I saw myself." Caroline placed a hand on hers and said, "Stories like yours are why I stood up." This wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It had become a movement. In Philadelphia, students launched a Stand Like Caroline workshop. In Denver, a teacher used the clip in class to teach self-respect. She received hundreds of letters, scribbled notes from kids, longhand stories from elders, raw, real, emotional. She read every one. Some she kept in a wooden box on her desk. With momentum behind her, Caroline began working with lawmakers on a gender equity education bill, focused on teaching respect early. She told Riley, "If we change how kids see others' worth, we change how adults behave." And while Dolan Trump never publicly admitted fault, he quietly softened his tone, stepping back from inflammatory language. Later, Ethan asked her, "So, what's the plan?" Caroline stepped toward the window, gazing out at Constitution Avenue. "We wait. Then we talk to the people who've lived this. No performance for ratings. We let the message land." And just like that, her team nodded. They knew what this was. Not a reaction. Not a trend. A turning point. Conservative outlets began distancing themselves. One op-ed called the incident a self-inflicted cultural misstep. Another asked, "What happens when performative toughness reveals real insecurity?" In Georgia, Caroline Leavitt's office started receiving flowers, handwritten notes, even a USB from a high school debate coach labeled "Stand Like Caroline." Even political rivals tread carefully. They knew this was no longer just a verbal clash, but a moment showing what happens when you try to diminish someone who knows their worth. 3 days after the hearing, Caroline kept a prior commitment, speaking to a group of girls at a leadership program in Montgomery, Alabama. No cameras, no stage, just a small gym, a microphone, and girls eager to see what the woman who stayed calm was like in person. Caroline dressed simply, sweater, jeans, low heels. She belonged in that room, not as a politician, but as someone who'd lived it. When he said that, I wasn't stunned by shock, Caroline began, but because I'd heard it my whole life. She shared stories of being dismissed for being too strong, too blunt, and how staying calm wasn't weakness, but strength. When a girl asked if it hurt, Caroline replied, "No, because he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to his idea of me." No prepared speech, just honest talk about being mistaken for an aide, despite wearing a congressional pin, and how she learned sometimes silence is power. You speak when it matters. After the talk, the girls crowded around sharing dreams. One wanted to be a lawyer. Another was running for student council president. Caroline listened to each as if they were future leaders, because she believed they were. Meanwhile, in Washington, Donald Trump faced mounting pressure. Some allies began criticizing him publicly. He appeared on a talk show emphasizing policy achievements, but questions about Caroline persisted. He called it a misunderstood moment. The audience remained unconvinced. Caroline didn't clap back. Instead, she channeled the momentum, partnering with nonprofits to expand girls' leadership programs, hosting online workshops, and uniting thousands of women across America. She also received an invitation to an international women's rights conference, where she planned to speak on the importance of gender equity education. "We don't just teach kids to read and write," she told Riley in a team meeting. "We have to teach them how to see others' worth." The Stand Like Caroline movement kept spreading. Schools across America began weaving her story into lessons on self-respect and leadership. A group of women in Los Angeles started a scholarship in her name, supporting girls pursuing law or politics. Caroline didn't seek the spotlight, but she knew how to use it for change. Donald Trump, though still in office, couldn't regain his former trust. He gradually withdrew from public events, focusing on legislative work quietly. Some thought he was biding his time for a comeback, but others believed that moment changed him, forcing him to rethink how he communicates. After the talk, an elderly woman named Ruth, a volunteer mentor in the program, pulled Caroline aside. "I've done this for 30 years, she said, "and I've never seen those girls sit so still. You gave them something we couldn't. You showed them how to hold their ground without bending." Caroline gripped her hand tightly. "It's the only way I know." That night, grainy but authentic clips from Caroline's talk spread rapidly on Instagram and TikTok. No Polish, no staging, just real moments. One commenter wrote, "She's not speaking from a pedestal. She's speaking like she's lived it." Caroline's comms team didn't need to post anything. The moment spread itself. But behind the scenes, Washington began to shift. The Congressional Black Caucus reached out with support. A senator from Arizona called Caroline saying, "I didn't grasp how deep this was until I saw you talk to those girls." The power now wasn't in the viral clip, but in the authenticity. Beyond the lights, in small rooms, no mics, but full of impact. 3 days later, in a closed meeting room on Capitol Hill, 4 lawmakers, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, sat together. Representative Amos Carver from Wyoming said bluntly, "That clip's not going away." No one disagreed. They'd seen the public's reaction and knew this moment was quietly shaping the political landscape. That afternoon, back at her office, Caroline's aide Riley walked in. "You won't believe this. Trump's office wants a private meeting. No press." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "He's trying to save face," Riley replied. "Maybe someone just told him this will stick longer than he thought." Caroline thought for a moment. Fine, but he comes here. 3 hours later, Donald Trump walked into Caroline's office alone. No aides, no cameras. Caroline sat calmly behind her desk. Trump began, "I'm not here to argue. I want to explain." Caroline gestured to the chair across from her. The air was heavy but not hostile. Trump spoke about pressure, expectations, and why he acted that way. He didn't apologize, but admitted his tone was wrong. Caroline listened. No interruptions, no sharp reactions. The conversation didn't resolve everything, but it was a start between two people who understood that despite differing views, they were navigating the same political reality, where every word leaves an echo. Caroline stayed silent for a moment, then responded, "I don't care about intent. I care about impact. Your words didn't just target me. They targeted every woman who's been called that, and you knew it." Trump nodded slowly, not arguing. "I get it," he said. "I'm not here to fix everything right now, but I want to start somewhere." Donald Trump sat down. He looked uncomfortable. Not nervous, just unaccustomed to this. He took a deep breath. "I said something I shouldn't have. It came out wrong." Caroline Leavitt tilted her head. "It didn't just come out. It came from somewhere. There's a difference." Trump started to respond, then stopped. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "So what did you mean?" Caroline asked, voice steady. A long pause followed. Finally, Trump said, "I wanted to make point. You were interrupting. I had the floor." Caroline nodded. "Donald," she said, leaning forward slightly. It was dismissive. "Not just to me, but to every woman who's been silenced in a room where they belong." That night, the clip of Caroline's talk spread like wildfire online. Unstaged. Just blurry phone footage, but real. Viewers felt something different. She doesn't talk like a politician. She talks like she's lived it. Caroline's office didn't repost anything. They didn't need to. The moment spread itself. In Washington, quiet conversations began. The Congressional Black Caucus offered support. A senator from Arizona admitted, "I didn't realize the impact until I saw you talk to those girls." In Congress, lawmakers discussed privately. This moment wasn't fading. That afternoon, Caroline's office got an unexpected call from Trump's team. He wanted a private meeting. No press. Caroline agreed, on the condition that Trump come to her office. 3 hours later, Donald Trump walked in. No aides, no cameras. Caroline was composed. "I'm not asking for an apology. I want you to think about it. This job isn't a TV show. People listen." Trump paused, then replied quietly, "I get it now." When Trump left, no handshake. Caroline only said to her press secretary, "He's shaken, but that's not my problem anymore." No press release followed. But in the next hearing, Trump didn't interrupt. He stayed quieter. Change had begun. Caroline, meanwhile, prepared to move forward. Her team brainstormed, drafting a formal resolution on respect in political spaces, especially for women of color. Not just to address one moment, but to lay the groundwork for real change. The resolution proposed new codes of conduct and mandatory training on multicultural communication and gender equity. Trump tried to rebuild his image, but public sentiment had shifted. A Democratic congressman privately messaged Caroline, "You did what many wanted to but didn't dare. Thank you." Caroline didn't rest on her laurels. She met voters, listened, inspired. In Savannah, a mother said, "My daughter watches your clip every day. She wants to be strong like you," without shouting. The Stand, like Caroline movement grew. Schools invited her to speak. Women's rights groups partnered with her. A podcast inspired by her launched, discussing how women reclaim their voice in spaces where they've been dismissed. Caroline also pushed forward the gender equity education bill she had begun drafting. She worked with bipartisan lawmakers, emphasizing that education isn't just about knowledge but values. "If we don't teach kids respect," she said in a hearing, "we're leaving another generation to fix our mistakes." One evening in Atlanta, after a long day of meetings, Caroline sat alone in her office looking at the framed photo of her mother. She thought about her journey, from the girl in Memphis who asked too many questions, to the woman changing how Congress views dignity. She knew the road was long. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Girls like Aaliyah, Tiana, and Maya, the ones she met in Montgomery, would carry that torch forward. They were already calling it the dignity respect, and public service resolution. 2 weeks. Later, when Caroline Leavitt presented it on the House floor, the chamber was unusually packed. Cameras rolled, phones were raised. But Caroline didn't perform. She didn't dramatize. She simply read the text, clear, concise, unapologetic. "This resolution isn't a reprimand," she said. "It's a mirror, one we all need to look into." The resolution called for professional standards in verbal communication, especially during official hearings. It acknowledged the painful history of dismissive language targeting women of color, and it urged Congress to lead by example, not just in policy, but in personal conduct. As Caroline spoke, reactions were mixed, some skeptical, others nodding quietly, and when she finished, applause, not thunderous but sincere. No one expected the resolution to pass immediately, but it cleared the committee stage with bipartisan support, and more importantly, it sparked something: real, raw, uncomfortable conversations that Congress had avoided for too long. That evening, Caroline sat alone in her hotel room. She dialed a familiar number. "Hi, Mom. I did it, not all of it, but I started something." Her mother paused on the other end. "You've always been the girl who didn't wait for permission." Caroline looked out at the Capitol, lit up in the dark like a symbol of both failure and hope. And in that moment, she didn't feel like a politician. She felt like a bridge between the women who came before and the ones still rising. "I saw every second," her mother said. "It was like thunder." In the days that followed, Caroline's office received over 8,000 emails, mostly from young women, some from students, others from single mothers, teachers, and even retired Army vets. One student wrote, "I want to be strong like you," but not rude. At a panel discussion days later, Caroline was asked if that confrontation, the one that began with Donald Trump's dismissive tone, had sparked any real change. She didn't hesitate. "I think it woke people up, and once you're awake, you can't put people back to sleep." Meanwhile, Trump, though still in office, began to adjust his public approach. He spoke more carefully, avoided dramatic outbursts, and leaned harder into policy. His advisors worked quietly to rebuild his image, but among many, the trust was gone. The Stand Like Caroline movement, however, kept growing. New organizations emerged across the country, supporting young women in leadership, law, and advocacy. Caroline's story was now woven into classrooms, her words discussed in civic programs, leadership training, and youth forums. But Caroline never let the spotlight distract her. She kept engaging communities, listening to stories, showing up to events without cameras, and relentlessly pushing the gender equity and education bill. "Education isn't just reading and math," she told a town hall in Charlotte. "Education is teaching kids to value others." Interestingly, though Trump wasn't directly tied to her resolution, he quietly backed similar initiatives behind closed doors, an unusual move for him. Some noticed. A few gave credit, but skepticism remained. Caroline didn't dwell on Trump's shift. She didn't waste time on image repair. Her focus was forward, refining her resolution, empowering unheard voices, and helping girls who, like her, had once been told to sit down and wait their turn. She wasn't waiting anymore, and neither were they. He received an invitation to an international women's rights conference in London, not because of his past statements, but because of what came after. He was asked to listen, not to speak, and for once Donald Trump accepted those terms. Meanwhile, Caroline Leavitt was preparing to attend the same conference. Her topic? How small moments create irreversible waves of change. "Every step forward," she told her chief of staff, Ethan, while working late into the evening, "starts with someone standing up." That night in her Atlanta office, Caroline sat quietly, reading a handwritten letter from a 15-year-old girl in Birmingham. "I used to think I wasn't good enough to speak up," the girl wrote. "But you made me believe I can." Caroline smiled gently, placing the letter inside the wooden box on her desk, the one she kept next to her mother's framed photo. In that quiet moment, she understood. Her journey was never just about a resolution, or a viral clip, or even a political career. It was about that one girl and the thousands like her, who now believed they had the right to speak without apology, to lead without permission, to rise without shouting. Because the real impact, it's not in headlines, it's in hearts. And one place was about to prove that in the most unexpected, powerful way. 6 months later, on a cold morning in Columbus, Georgia, a small public school named Riverfront Academy gathered its students in the multi-purpose room for a debate presentation. There were no journalists, no politicians, just foldable chairs, nervous middle schoolers, and a handwritten banner that read, "Voices That Matter." In the front row sat teachers and parents. One mother held her phone up just in case her daughter spoke, but no one expected what happened next. A young black girl, no older than 13, stepped up to the mic. She took a deep breath, looked at the paper in her hand, then put it down. "I was told I was too loud," she said, "that I should wait my turn, but I watched a woman in Congress not yell, but still make the world listen." The crowd fell silent. Her teacher wiped away a tear. "She made me believe that I'm allowed to be both strong and kind, and that my voice doesn't have to sound like yours to matter." Her name was Tiana, and when she finished, the room stood to its feet. Back in Washington, Caroline was reading a report about school debates when her phone buzzed. A video, grainy, unedited. The clip of Tiana's speech. No hashtags, no production team. Just a voice, echoing the same strength Caroline had once shown under pressure. She watched it in silence, then whispered, "It's happening." The Stand Like Caroline movement wasn't just a trend anymore. It had become a legacy, not built in front of cameras, but in classrooms, homes, and halls where dignity had once been dismissed. And the man who once tried to silence her, even Donald Trump now treaded differently, more cautious, more measured. Whether it was growth or calculation, time would tell. But one thing was clear. The room had changed, and no one, not even the loudest voices in politics, could talk over it anymore. Plastic chairs, folding tables, a podium borrowed from the local community center. Nothing fancy, but for the students at Riverfront Academy, it wasn't just a school event. It was the day they got to speak their truth. The theme? Power and presence. How we use our voice. Nia Carter, 13, adjusted her glasses, stepped to the mic with a folded speech in hand, and paused. She looked nervous, but when she opened her mouth, the fire inside her stunned the room. "I was chosen to represent my values, my community, and every girl who's ever been told to shrink herself to make others comfortable." When Nia quoted Caroline's floor speech, teachers clapped through tears. "I don't want to shout to be heard," she said. "I just want my voice to matter." Caroline didn't know about that moment. She wasn't there. But that's the thing about legacy. It echoes in places you've never been. Back in Washington, she worked quietly. The Respect in Politics resolution didn't pass in full, but it shook the walls. Committees began reviewing their procedures. Chairs started noticing tone. Meetings added conduct guidelines. Change came slowly, but it came. And more importantly, something had shifted, not in politics, but in the women around her. A young staffer whispered, "I wore my natural hair today. Because of you." Republican aide admitted, "My boss changed the way he talks in meetings because of what you stood for." As for Donald Trump, he never apologized. Not once. But he never used that tone again either. Whether it was regret or simply politics, it didn't matter. Because the line had been drawn. One day, in an airport lounge, a woman who had once harshly criticized Caroline stopped her. She reached out gently. "I didn't agree with you before," she said. "But how you handled him made me rethink what real strength is." Later, on the flight, Caroline pulled out a napkin, scribbling something with a hotel pen. "Rethink what strength is." She folded it quietly, slipped it into her notebook. That, right there, was her legacy. Not the confrontation with Trump, not the viral clip, But this new model of power, calm, steady, no shouting, no stunts, just substance and certainty. She kept going. Workshops. In underserved communities. Programs to empower young girls to lead. Refining the gender equity education bill word by word. We're not just changing laws, she told her chief of staff. We're changing how people see each other. And then one night, back in Atlanta, Caroline opened a letter from a girl named Nia. I won my debate because of you, it read. I didn't shout, but they still listened. Caroline smiled, folded the letter, placed it gently in a wooden box next to her mother's framed photo. She knew now. Her journey wasn't about one viral moment. It wasn't about Donald Trump. It was about girls like Nia, girls learning to stand up without ever asking for permission. Later, as the plane lifted off the Atlanta tarmac, Caroline reached for a napkin. She scribbled 4 words with a borrowed hotel pen. Rethink what strength is. She folded it and tucked it into the pages of her notebook, next to the first draft of her education bill and a photo of her mother. That, she realized, was her legacy, not the clapback, not the applause, not even the headlines that came and went, but a new model of power, calm, steady, no need for show. She continued hosting workshops, sitting with communities, listening more than she spoke. One teenage girl, once terrified of being too strong, whispered to her after an event, "You made me see that it's not wrong to be powerful. It's just wrong to stay silent." The Stand Like Caroline movement spread like quiet wildfire, from Chicago classrooms to Denver scholarships to women's leadership boot camps in Baltimore. Letters poured in. Thank you. Because of you, I ran for class president. My daughter stood up to her teacher today, and she didn't cry this time. She read them all. One evening, she smiled at a message from Nia, the 13-year-old in Columbus. I didn't shout, Nia wrote, but they still listened. Caroline folded it gently and placed it in the wooden box beside her mother's photo. She knew then her legacy wasn't a moment. It was a movement, not against Donald Trump, but beyond him. As for Trump, he never said sorry. Not once. But after that day on the Hill, his tone changed. The interruption, the dismissiveness, and it didn't return. Was it strategy? Was it pride? Did it matter? Not really, because what happened next wasn't about him. When the new congressional session began, Caroline introduced 3 bills. One on educational equity, one improving maternal health care access, and one expanding housing protections for single mothers. She co-sponsored them with a bipartisan coalition, proving once again, power doesn't always come from domination. It comes from building something that lasts. We're not just changing laws, she told her chief of staff, Ethan. We're changing how people see each other. And they were. Slowly, quietly, powerfully. She still didn't care much about Trump's journey, whether he recovered politically, whether he softened his image or didn't. She had no time to track his PR strategy. She was too busy helping young girls become leaders before the world taught them to apologize for their voice. One night, as she finalized her speech for the International Women's Conference in London, Caroline paused to read a final letter from Nia. Because of you, I applied to the Young Leaders Program. I want to help other girls speak without fear. She smiled, folded it, placed it in the wooden box. Then she looked out the window at the skyline. She didn't think of the moment she stood her ground against Donald Trump. She thought of the ripples that moment sent across schools, living rooms, and hearts. And she knew, true change doesn't happen in the moment. It happens in what that moment awakens. And this time, it had awakened a generation. She didn't ride the wave of public attention. Caroline Leavitt didn't care for applause. She cared for impact, real, lasting, soul-level change. The kind you don't see in headlines, but in how a little girl stands taller in a classroom the next day. At a small community panel in Mobile, Alabama, a man in the back asked her, "Do you think that moment with Trump was your peak?" Caroline smiled gently. "Moments pass," she said. "Movements don't." If I can leave behind one sentence that makes someone believe in themselves again, I've done my job. But before the story closed, Caroline wanted to leave one more message. A message for anyone who's ever been told to sit down when they should have stood up. No cameras, no makeup team, no political spectacle. Just Caroline on a small wooden stage. In a local town hall in Augusta, Georgia. Rows of folding chairs, a creaky mic. The audience was simple. Barbers, single moms, retired teachers, volunteers, kids with notebooks, old men with worn-out caps. She adjusted the mic and looked up at the crowd. "Let me tell you why I keep showing up," she began. "Because one sentence can shift a room. But showing up again and again, that's what changes the world." An elderly woman in the back leaned toward her granddaughter and whispered, "Listen close." Caroline's voice was steady now, not angry, not even emotional, just certain. "I keep showing up because I remember what it felt like when a powerful man tried to reduce me to a soundbite. When Donald Trump said, 'Sit down, girl,' he didn't just say it to me. He said it to every woman who's ever been told her voice was too loud, too ambitious, too inconvenient." She paused. I didn't clap back for the likes. I stood my ground because dignity should never be optional. There was silence. Then a quiet, rising ripple of applause. Not for a performance, but for the truth. We don't need louder voices. We need stronger ones. Voices that speak not to dominate, but to elevate. That's the kind of power they can't mute. A young girl in the front row clutched her notebook. "Donald Trump didn't shake me. He sharpened me." And he reminded this country that true strength isn't in how loud you speak. It's in how long you stand. As Caroline stepped down from the stage, people rose, not in thunderous ovation, but in solidarity. Later that night, she wrote 6 words on the back of a coffee receipt and tucked it inside her mother's photo frame. "Stand soft. Speak steady. Stay loud." She knew now, more than ever. Her legacy wasn't a moment. It was a model. Not about resisting Trump, but about rising beyond him. Not about the insult, but about the response. Because power isn't always in the mic. Sometimes it's in the silence that follows. And Caroline Leavitt had made sure every girl knew they didn't need permission to be heard. "What happened that day," Caroline said, her voice calm but unshakable, "wasn't just about one woman being disrespected by Donald Trump. It was about a culture, a system, that teaches us who's worthy of respect, who should be ignored, and who's supposed to stay silent." She paused, scanning the small town hall room. No press, no spotlight, just people. I wasn't surprised by what was said to me, but I was done letting it slide. And I think a lot of you are too. The room fell still, not tense, but shared, because almost everyone there had lived a version of that moment, being told to stay in their place, lower their voice, be agreeable, don't make a fuss, don't make it political, don't make it uncomfortable. Caroline looked up, her voice steady. "When I said I was elected to stand up, I wasn't just talking about Congress. I was talking about every space that tries to make you shrink, every classroom, every boardroom, every waiting room, every dinner table." She pivoted slightly on her heel, then asked the room, "Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable the world gets when a woman, especially a woman of color, refuses to make herself small?" She let the question hang there, unafraid of the silence. "That discomfort," she said, "it's not your burden to fix, it's theirs to face." Applause broke out. Not the kind for a performance, but the kind that rises from truth. She waited, let it settle, then continued. "Some of you may never run for office, that's okay, but I promise you this, your voice matters. In your home, in your workplace, in your kid's school, at the ballot box, use it." A hand raised in the front row. A young woman, barely 20, notebook in her lap, eyes wide with the fire of someone trying to find her own strength. She asked, "How do you keep speaking when people keep trying to silence you?" Caroline didn't flinch. She walked toward the edge of the stage, looked her in the eye, and gave a small, warm smile. "You remember who you were," she said. "Before, they told you to be quiet." The room hummed, not loud, but deep, the way truth hums when it finally finds a place to land. "I'm not perfect," Caroline continued. I'm not a saint, but I know why I'm here. And I know every time I choose to speak without shouting, stand without performing, respond without apologizing, I'm telling every girl watching that you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to refuse to disappear. She stood still, unmoving, and then added, Donald Trump may have told me to sit down that day, but I stood, and I kept standing. Because strength isn't about volume, it's about presence. The girl, in the front row, wiped a tear and closed her notebook. Later that evening, as the folding chairs were packed away and the lights dimmed, Caroline sat backstage and scribbled on the back of a napkin. Power isn't how loud you speak, it's what echoes after you do. That was her legacy, not the moment, not the headline, not even the clash with Donald Trump. But what came next? The hundreds of girls who now believed they didn't have to make themselves smaller to be respected. The thousands of women who relearned their strength. The millions of viewers who watched. The clip not to see a takedown, but to see a new model of power. One that didn't shout, one that didn't flinch, one that simply refused to sit down. She didn't choose to respond with anger. She didn't insult him back. Instead, Caroline Leavitt used strategic silence and carefully chosen words to redefine what power looks like when she looked directly at Donald Trump and said, I don't care about intent. I care about impact. It wasn't just a reply, it was a mirror. In that moment, Caroline wasn't just speaking to Trump. She was speaking to everyone who's ever been dismissed, belittled, or told to stay quiet. Because here's the truth. Whether in the workplace, on social media, or in the halls of Congress, words have weight, and how we respond to them defines the story. The lesson from Caroline's journey reaches far beyond politics. It's about real life. Your life. Stand up for your values. Speak your truth. But do it with respect, clarity, and unshakable purpose. That's what Caroline taught Nia and the girls she met in Augusta. That's what she reminded us all, that every person, whether in a classroom, a boardroom, or at a dinner table, can use their voice to spark change without aggression. And in a country where women, especially women of color, still face subtle and overt bias, refusing to shrink yourself like Caroline did, is not just brave, it's a call to action. Be persistent, stay grounded, build alliances, and show up again and again even when no one's watching. That's what she did, working quietly with bipartisan lawmakers, investing in communities and staying focused on the work, not the headlines. In the end, Caroline's legacy isn't defined by a viral moment or a confrontation with Trump. It's defined by a fire that spreads through handwritten letters, school speeches, and brave choices made by everyday people. The Stand Like Caroline movement is a reminder. Lasting change doesn't come from noise. It comes from consistency, from dignity, from showing up when the cameras are off. So wherever you are, whatever you face, stand tall, speak clearly, and don't wait for permission to lead. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share it forward. Let's keep telling the stories that light the path for others. We'll see you in the next video with more real moments that shape the future.